The topics and opinions expressed in the following show are solely those of the host and their guests and not those of W4CY Radio, its employees, or affiliates. We make no recommendations or endorsements for radio show programs, services, or products mentioned on air or on our web. No liability, explicit or implied, shall be extended to W4CY Radio or its employees or affiliates. Any questions or comments should be directed to those show hosts. Thank you for choosing W4CY Radio.
Are you a songwriter? Are you looking to turn your songwriting passion into a full-time gig? Whether you are just at the start of your songwriting journey or a seasoned industry professional, this show is made for you. Welcome to the Songwriter Show, bringing together songwriting news, interviews, and community. Now, welcome your host, Sarantos.
Welcome back, everyone. I'm your host, Sarantos, and I'm so happy you're joining us again this Tuesday evening for the Songwriter Show. Thank you for tuning in. I'm a solo music artist who's been writing lyrics for as long as I can remember. Words are very important to me, and that's why I'm especially thrilled to host this show for you. I believe that every single song is a unique story. The Songwriter Show is broadcast live on #1 ranked W4CY Radio and has listeners in all 206 countries in the world and every state in the U.S. The station is licensed with ASCAP, BMI, CSAC, Sound Exchange, and has partnerships throughout the music industry, including iHeartRadio and exposure to over 300 million listeners. Tonight's guest is Linda Marks. Linda is a singer, songwriter, and arranger who integrates elements of jazz with contemporary folk and pop freedom that can impress the ear while soothing the soul. Linda's music has been featured in the Boston Globe, Boston Magazine, and on National Public Radio. Her 2018 Moments album was released to a sold-out show at Club Passam and was the #1 album of 2018 on the Big Jazz umbrella. Her 7th album, In Grace, is due out in September 2019. Welcome to the show, Linda. How are you doing tonight?
I'm good, Sarantos. Thanks so much for having me.
You're very welcome. I loved reading your story there. So I guess it's safe to say that you like jazz a little bit?
I love jazz, and I actually love most music. What's hard about being a songwriter is you often need to be put in just a box, and I certainly love the jazz genre. However, I tend to cross over to a lot of different genres, and jazz is one of them, but it's not the only one of them.
Yeah, and I think you hit it on the head. I think people try to put us in a box, but nowadays music it spans multiple genres, and even if you're specific with a style of song you like to do, doesn't mean every song's going to be like that. So I definitely respect that, and I try to be the same way.
Yes, absolutely. And for me, songs come to me. I'm like, when I went to college, even though sometimes I had to write music and do assignments, I hated that because that's like an intellectual approach. I'm much more from a heart and soul approach. And when a song comes to me, it is how it is. So recently, I've written a gospel song. I just wrote a song last night that is definitely more singer-songwriter, but it doesn't really fit in the jazz box or the folk box. You know, maybe it's more like something you'd expect in a musical. But what songs come and they have their own unique style. And it's really nice about being a singer-songwriter because that often suggests that you're not just in one box.
Yeah, absolutely. You had a very interesting website. I was reading a little bit about the power of the heart.
Yes.
Tell the audience a little bit about that.
Well, the very short story is that the heart has the strongest electromagnetic field in the body. When people are 8 to 10 feet from each other, our heart waves interact without words. And what's important about the heart is what I call the emotion-body interface. When people have almost any psychological thing that ails them, examples being anxiety and depression, you can notice there are physical sensations in your body. Like if you're anxious, you might have a knot in your stomach, or you may feel a tightness in your chest. If you're depressed, you may feel a heaviness in your chest. The flip side is when people have physical ailments, there are emotions just under the surface that we often can't access. So a person who has a stomach ache might be really sad underneath it, but they can't feel the sadness. A person with a headache might feel a judgmental voice just beating up inside of their head. So in the work that I do, I work at that emotion-body interface to help translate the kinds of symptoms that send people to medical doctors or psychotherapists into what our body's trying to tell us, so we can have more emotional safety, which is very hard to find in our culture, and we can learn more about what we need, or if there are painful things we've experienced that no one has ever witnessed or that we don't even know how to express, those things can happen so that we can actually heal.
That's wonderful. Any instruments that you play?
I play piano. When I was a little girl, my first word was piano. I didn't have a piano for a long time because my family didn't have one, and I actually bought one myself. In fact, I wrote a song about that, which is the title song for my 2020 album called The Piano. But when I was a little girl, when there wasn't a piano, I was in an experimental recorder program where my parents were told I was gifted and talented. There was a Suzuki free violin program. I learned to play drums as the girl drummer in my grammar school band. I bought a guitar when I was 11 and taught myself that because I didn't have a piano. But my real passion is piano. So even if I can play some other things, I really love the piano.
Okay, so is the piano typically where you start your songwriting, or do you hum a melody, or do you start with the lyrics? What's your process?
It's all unique. Most often something just comes to me, and like I wrote a song yesterday, and when I was driving home from my office, I started to hear a melody, and then I went to the piano just to see what the chords were that went with the melody, and then a story started to come forward. So it sort of emerged over the course of the night. The whole story came out, and the melody and the chorus and the bridge came out, and the chords and the arrangement came out. So it's sort of an integrative process, but that started with a melody. Sometimes, like, the whole thing will just come out. Other times it will come in fragments, and I might just sit with it for like a week and just keep meditating on, so where's it going? Where's it going? But each song is almost like a baby that needs to be birthed, and I try to follow it.
Yeah. How do you decide what song is going to make the cut? Do you have a manager? Do you have a confidant, friends? Who do you run it by?
Well, I work with someone named Doug Hammer. He's an award-winning pianist and composer, in addition to an award-winning sound engineer, and he's the person I do all my albums with. In fact, I've done 6 albums with him, going on number 7. And my first album actually came out in the 1980s when I was like 21 years old. But I take songs to him and get his input. I also sometimes send the song to a friend of mine I met when I was 21 and she was 26, and we tend to send each other our songs. But I do get some feedback. I actually belong to a songwriters group that meets once a month too, and I can bring a new song there. But usually the songs have a lot to them. It's like, I think the difference between inspired songs and songs you just sit down and sort of intellectually write is when it's an inspired song, it's coming from the heart. So there's heart inside the song. And if I were just writing an intellectual song, I might not feel as comfortable with what came out of it as when it's an inspired song, because there's definitely an emotional connection when I sing it, and often when the listener hears it.
Yeah, and is there something you focus on more? Do you focus on the emotion? Do you just kind of what comes out of you, or do you focus on a story? What's your first focus?
My first focus is where I connect to the song, and I can give you some different examples of songs I've written in the last 6 months. One example is actually this song was released in November, but it's also on my In Grace album. There's a tear down epidemic where I live. I live in the Boston area, and a lot of the older homes and even town centers are being torn down for bigger, fancier, higher priced houses and town centers to come in. And where my therapy office was located, the town center was being decimated. And there were all these really wonderful mom and pop shops there that my son is now 23. That's where I would take him. I had so many fond memories, and my heart was breaking knowing that a person like me probably couldn't afford to get a house there with what was happening, never mind all the other people. And I was taking photographs of the teardown process. And so I started to write a song about that, which is called Enough. And that song and the lyrics came from some of my own experience with Tear Down, and that isn't simple enough and modest enough and beauty enough and things like that. So the song turned out to be something that's very relevant. It was actually covered in Boston Magazine in October, and this Thursday night, I'm actually being asked to sing it at a meeting in the town of Newton, the city of Newton, actually, on Tear Down, because they saw it in Boston Magazine and they wanted me to bring it to a whole discussion of the tear down epidemic. So that's one example of how a song grew, just from walking by, feeling sad and taking photographs as a way of sort of grieving the transformation. Another example, and this is one of the songs that I've given to you to play tonight, which is called The Gardener. My mom died of Alzheimer's on March 29th, 5 years ago. And I actually had a gig on March 29th this year, which was the 5-year anniversary of her death. And when I woke up the Monday before the gig, which was on the weekend, I realized I would really love to pay tribute to my mom and her journey. So the song started to come through. And with Alzheimer's, you really lose someone twice, not just once, because as their memory fades, they become a shell of the person you once knew. But what was amazing about my mom's journey is that her deepest core self, which was as a gardener, remained no matter what. Even as she broke her hip and couldn't even really do very much, she'd somehow managed to lower herself onto the ground in rehab and do the gardening motion that most people didn't understand. But having watched her go from gardening in her garden to, as the Alzheimer's crept in, gardening on her lawn for like 5 hours with no sense of time, and when she no longer could live there, even gardening on her rug with the same gardening motions, that was sort of the core of her, that no matter how she started to disappear, it was always there. So the image of the quiet lady gardening in her mind came through on that Monday before the anniversary of her death. So on the actual anniversary of her death, I had a tribute song, The Gardener, which I performed for the first time, and I actually just submitted it to the NPR Tiny Desk contest as well. So that's another story of where a song came from. Yeah.
Yeah. Do you do a lot of performing in public?
I do quite a lot of performing. Yes, I perform. Sometimes I perform just me, but because I'm an arranger, it's a lot more fun performing with other instrumentalists. So I perform regularly as a duo with a guitarist named Woody Carpinella, as a trio with Woody and a violinist named Jackie Damsky. When I have the opportunity to perform at a big venue like Club Passim or Scullers Jazz Club or the Burren, I like to bring my full band. I have a 7-piece band with 2 backup singers to play my full arrangements, which is what I do on my albums. So it's a real joy to do that, but most gigs don't pay enough money to bring that many people along and pay for everybody. But I love to perform, and I perform many times a month because bringing music heart to heart to people is just a really enriching experience.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you sing, play piano, both?
I sing and I play the piano. When I play as a solo performer, I clearly do all of that. When I play with Woody, sometimes he plays guitar when I play piano. There are a few songs I'll do where he'll just play the guitar and I'll sing, because it's sometimes really nice to have the mix. So when we perform as a duo, he may do a solo thing as a guitarist. I may do something as piano and voice, and most of them are us together. So yes, I do play piano when I sing. And when I perform at a big venue, I integrate at least a handful of covers, and sometimes I front the band when I have the whole band, and I let someone else like Doug Hammer, who's a virtuoso pianist, play the piano, because it's really nice to just stand and make eye contact with the audience and not always be hidden behind a piano.
Sure. If you have someone that's just gotten into the industry, like a younger person, if they ask you, how do you get people to take you seriously as a musician, how would you answer them?
I would say the first thing is to take yourself seriously. One of the things I've loved to do, and I've done this quite a lot, is mentor young musicians and help them basically become more comfortable with their own love of music. And when I do big shows, I very often bring a teenage singer as one of my backup singers to give them an opportunity to have that big experience, like in a significant venue, and they usually rise to the occasion. So number one is take yourself seriously. It's really important to find your own voice as a musician, like what moves you, what kind of music do you connect to? Are you someone who'd rather be a song interpreter, or do you find yourself moved to write songs? Both are valuable. Is there a particular instrument that calls you? Are there particular musical artists that you feel attracted to? So helping the person define their own identity as a musician is really important. And there are times to have coaching and instruction, whether it's music theory or vocal instruction or instrumental instruction, or just the experience of playing an ensemble. But I think it's really important to support a person at going at their own pace. And the most important thing, again, to come back to is that they just take themselves seriously. And if they love something, to really follow what they love.
Sure. Do you teach at all? Do you teach piano or lyric writing, anything?
I would be a horrible piano teacher because I taught myself. So I could teach a person songwriting piano, but usually when people study formal piano, they have the people that gave the official formal lessons as opposed to the singer-songwriter who taught themselves. I do teach voice, and particularly I help people find their voice, which relates to the body psychotherapy side of my life too, because our voice is really who we are. And one of my best coaches, Rebecca Paris, who sadly died last year, the best way she helped me was giving me the space where I could just have my feelings. Because I was a singer-songwriter when I was in my early 20s, and that was the first time I did it professionally. Then I had to take a couple decades off being a single mom with no child support and a child to raise, and it was impossible to gig while raising my son. So I had a lot of pain about not having been able to do it for a long time. And when I'd go see Rebecca Paris, I would just cry and cry and cry. In fact, I cried probably 90% of the time and sang 10% of the time. So if someone comes to me for voice lessons, it's important to work with their heart in addition to technique, because if you want to connect with the audience, it's really a heart-to-heart experience. And I love to help people find their voice in that kind of way.
Sure. We got a couple questions here from the listeners.
Sure.
We'll take the first one here. What should a person learn first? I think they mean in general with music and songwriting.
Well, I think when I look at what does a person need to know, if you're going to do songwriting, it is important to have some sense of what are chords, and if you have a melody, what are the chords that go with the melody, and even a little bit about music theory, about how chords work. Even though I don't sit there and do the music theory, I'm at least able, when I write something, to translate the melody into the chords that go with it. So I think that's an important skill. In this day and age, when we have iPhones with recorders, you can literally just sing into the recorder and you can put a song idea down. In fact, I do that when I can't get to a piano, and it holds the idea. So you can not know that, but then you need to find someone that is able to do that. I've actually done that to help people before. They've taken like a melody, but they can't put the chords on, and I can put the chords onto it. So those are one level of the first thing. I think it's also important for a person to feel comfortable singing. Some people have trouble matching pitch. And I actually have a man who is going to be coming to work with me because he really wants to be able to sing on pitch and learn to sing. And so you don't necessarily need to be a performer if you're a songwriter. Some people just write songs and they don't perform them. But if you're going to be able to communicate what you're writing, to be able to sing on pitch enough that you can have a melody stick out and have some teeth in it, that's another important skill. So those are probably the first two things I would suggest on the music side. On the writing side, I would get a journal and just, in essence, have like a stream of consciousness write, where you sit down and if there's something you're interested in writing about, just writing and writing and writing and seeing what comes out. Because if we just edit our thoughts immediately, we often don't get the creativity flowing and don't get some of the possibilities. So that's probably where I'd invite someone to start with the lyrics, just finding something that moves them and just doing a stream of consciousness right as the very first pass, with editing to come later.
Yeah. A bunch more questions here. Let's take one more before we listen to your first song.
Sure.
What if your voice has changed and it's not the same as you want it to sound? What advice would you give that listener?
Well, voices do change at a lot of different points in life. Even when I worked with Rebecca Paris, she made the comment that she used to have many more octaves of notes. And as she got older, she had to lower her keys. So that kind of thing happens. And also, I've worked with the transgender community. And if a person is basically going through the change process of gender, there's a change in the register of their voice and even a need to learn how to use their voice again, never mind, the octaves they sing in. So no matter what, the reason your voice is changing, to become comfortable with the range that you have is important. So vocalizing, in a way, it's like when you have a personal trainer that gives you certain exercises to work on muscle groups, to vocalize and use the notes that are in your voice so that you strengthen your voice. And most of us have a chest voice, a head voice, and then there's a mix, a mid-range where we bring the chest up or the head down. And to strengthen your voice, you need to work in all three regions. So again, it doesn't matter whether your voice goes from higher to lower or lower to higher. To strengthen the range that you actually have is important to be able to sing with the voice that you have at any time.
Yeah, I agree with you. And we're going to listen to your song in a second here, but I just want to point out, I've been on this journey 6 years, and there's a lot of voice-related questions from our listeners. The one thing that I'll tell you for me is I wish I started taking vocal lessons much sooner, because I started taking songwriting lessons and I learned a ton. But the one thing that the more confident you get, and in the beginning I would just wing it. I didn't know what I was doing. I was just singing. And now after years, I understand melody and how to make, things that are catchy and how to sing on pitch. These are things that I highly encourage you if you're serious about your career. I used to do videos, YouTube. I bought courses, but there's nothing like being in person with a vocal teacher. So I would definitely recommend to our listeners that are asking all these questions, I'm sure they can contact you and we'll give them your contact information later, but it's really important. I think it's very underutilized.
I totally agree. There's nothing like a live person. And in our age where everything is internet, you can't have the kind of attention that a face-to-face person can give, particularly when you're trying to develop something like singing. The one other piece I'd add to what you say is breath support is so important. So to learn techniques for breathing, doing diaphragmatic breathing, because that's like the foundation of your voice, including singing on pitch.
Yeah, and we're going to listen to your song now, but the last thing I'm going to say is 6 years ago when I started, I would literally take a deep breath in and sing. And now it's to the point that I don't think about it. And breath support, it's super important.
Yes.
But let's listen to your song and then we'll come back and talk about a bunch more stuff, Linda.
Great. Thank you.
All right. So here we go.
It's been 5 years since you died today, though it feels timeless. Your life light dims slowly over time. It broke my heart to see you fade as the villain stole your mind. Your lifelong love of gardening stayed behind. The quiet lady gardening in her mind. You couldn't risk the poverty of your childhood, but the price you paid for marriage was quite high. Every time he yelled at you, did he take a piece of your mind? Gardening was the refuge you could find. The quiet lady gardening in her mind. When he screamed at you, when he screamed at me, did something die inside? When he put you down, when he ordered you around, at least new life could grow from your seeds. I tried my best to care for you when his time shell, her spirit still was kind. The quiet lady gardening in her mind. For many years you'd work the soil in your garden. As your memory left, you'd garden on the lawn. When you broke your hip as you healed somehow, you'd creep down to the floor. You'd moved your hand to see what stones you'd find. The lawn, the rug, the floor were what you mind. The quiet lady gardening in her mind. As night merged with day, as time went away, your instinct still survived. When you moved your hands, did you understand? At least new life could grow from your seeds. If I ever see a flower in the heavens, I think I know to take it as a sign. You're sifting stones, you're sorting twigs, and planting seeds divine. The quiet lady gardening in her mind. The quiet lady gardening in her mind.
And now, welcome this week's special guest.
Linda, that was very impressive. You definitely have a very classic voice that's very elegant and lovely.
Thank you.
You're very welcome. I'm going to ask one more question that the listeners had, and then I'm going to kind of move on. But they asked about, do you have to be in person for vocal lessons? And I know a lot of times, I personally take mine on Skype.
Yeah.
So I assume you're able to do...
I can certainly do it on Skype.
Okay.
Yes. I can
that answers that
do
question.
it on Skype. Yeah.
Okay. And that kind of opens up a lot of possibilities because this way people don't have to live in your geographic area.
Exactly.
And since a lot of people are asking about vocal lessons, if you don't mind, we'll give them your contact information a little bit later. But
sure.
Give us an idea of what roughly you charge for hour lessons, just because it seems like there's a lot of interest out there.
Yeah. I do usually, well, I can do 30-minute or 60-minute. It really depends on what the market is in the area. People have very different fee structures based on where they live. Here in Boston, $100 for an hour lesson is a pretty typical fee. In New York City, that's probably low. And in Fort Wayne, Indiana, that might be high. So, that's a Boston rate, but I would definitely speak with the person who was calling just to see what was more the market rate in their city.
Okay, fair enough. So one of the questions I like to ask a lot of my guests, tell us about scams. What scam have you fallen for? What do you want to warn us about? Because we're a tight-knit community and we got to stick together.
I haven't fallen for a scam, and I hope I never do, honestly.
Okay. Are there any that you know about that you want to warn us about that your friends have fallen for?
I don't know a lot about scams because the way I do most of what I do is directly through my community and networking. So when I do network through people I know, usually what they recommend is something reputable that other people they know have had good experiences with. So, so basically what I would just say is whether you're looking for a coach, whether you're wanting to record an album, whether you're wanting to look at distribution, it's really important to talk to people that have been working with reputable people so that, you work with a sound engineer who has a great reputation if you're working on an album, and you find a graphic designer who's tried and true to help you with the graphics. And so my own bias is working directly through my networks, and then I get quality referrals, which help avoid scams.
Sure. Yeah, that's if you can do that, that's probably the best thing to do. If you talk to someone who's dealt with a promoter or a radio marketer or anything like that, obviously you're going to get a good referral and you won't have to worry about that.
Right.
Yeah.
What I can say is I've certainly gotten phone solicitations of people wanting me to do certain things, and I always say no, because basically if a person is cold calling me and they don't know me and they're wanting to sell something to me that has to do with some sort of promotional services or management services, I just don't go near it, because there are enough people I know who work with reputable people that if someone cold calls me, I'm just like a number or an object to them. So I'm sort of old school in the sense of I believe that when we know somebody who knows somebody, at least there's a vetting process.
Yeah, the one thing I'll kind of warn people about too that's happened to me on some of these sites like Reverb Nation, people are like, "Oh, you're ranked number one," and I'm looking for whatever, and I've wasted some money on some people there, and I would just tell people to be highly critical. And in fact, you could tell you're getting cold called, and when you put out, I put out regular music every month, and I'll put out a song that's rated like the worst thing I ever did, and these people tell me it's the best thing they've ever heard, and they want to. Yeah. So you kind of know they're full of it. Yes. And then the funny thing is, I have a pretty canned response now of, well, tell me about this and references and what, and then you never hear back from them. If you want specifics, and then 6 months later they'll send you the same exact template email. Exactly. Yeah.
I've certainly received those. And the reason I sort of don't think of it when you ask the question is I just push them away. If someone is doing, I've had phone solicitations, I've had template emails, and I've had that experience too, where I've said no, and then I get the same thing from the same person somewhere down the road. But the first time when I spoke with them, I already eliminated them. So then when it comes back, I just say, nah, this is not real.
Yeah. Tell us a little bit about your first job. What was the first job you ever had?
Let me think. What was the first job I ever had? Well, in a way, when I was a kid, because I wanted a piano, I would do almost anything I could to get a piano. So, I would bake and sell lemonade and stuff I baked on the streets. I would mow lawns, even though I was a girl. I would shovel snow, even though I was a girl. So, I started doing work kind of things even when I was very, very young. I worked, actually, a really cool job I got when I was in high school is I worked at Fenway Park, the Red Sox stadium, because I absolutely loved the Red Sox. And I worked at a souvenir stand, unfortunately proving that women get a fraction of what guys got, because I got minimum wage and I had guy colleagues who got commission on what they sold and made 5 times what I did. But I was just happy working there. I know. And another early job I had around the same time is I actually worked in medical research in hematology, studying prostaglandins, which is rather technical for the lay listener. But because I did always have an interest in the mind-body connection and medicine, I decided to try that path when I was a teenager as well. So those are some of my early jobs.
Okay. So I'm going to ask you a very tricky question now, and then I'm going to tell you what my answer is going to be. But what's the best Italian restaurant in Boston?
Oh, my God. That's really hard because the North End has so many amazing Italian restaurants. You can almost just pick one, and they're all going to be amazing. So it's hard to pick just one. There's one called Limoncello that I like a lot. And there's another one I can picture it visually, but I can't pull its name up in my head. But basically going to the North End in Boston, there are just amazing Italian restaurants.
Yeah, I've been to the one you're talking about. My favorite is Giacomo's, which is always a huge line when we go there. I've been to Boston maybe 3-4 times, and it's a very small place. You got to pay cash, but it's the one thing I remember.
Very cool. Yeah. On a completely different Italian side, there was a pop-up, which is a whole thing where restaurants just pop up for periods of time rather than our brick and mortar long-term investments. The very, very, very best pizza that was ever made was a place called Rabatini's that was a pop-up. and it was being written up in every possible publication. It was probably on National Public Radio. And unfortunately, the space that the entrepreneur had was only for like 9 months, and he's trying to get funded and find a permanent space. But for the world's best pizza, if he ever gets a space again, I would highly recommend Rabatini's, because it's not like anything else you'd ever have had in your life.
Huh. If that ever comes back, you're gonna have to like shoot me an email saying to look out for that. Yeah.
Absolutely.
All right. Who's your favorite person to follow on Instagram? And you can't say me, by the way. You got to give it someone else.
Gosh, that's an interesting question. It's hard to pick just one. Well, maybe I'm going to say Brock Holt from the Boston Red Sox. I really like his work ethic, and he has a son who he works on training in baseball and golf skills, and they have a really sweet relationship. So I'm going to say Brock Holt from the Boston Red Sox.
Okay. Tell us a little bit about who your role model is.
That's a really interesting question. Well, I have a number of people that I could say were influences. It's hard to have a total role model. My grammar school principal's name was Virginia Thompson, and she was a very grounded, visionary woman. In fact, she did something very unconventional. She had a daughter, and she named her Virginia Jr., which is what you did with boys, not girls. So I can say that she certainly gave me a model of a woman who had a vision and just pursued it and wasn't necessarily swayed by convention or what was expected. So it was good to see someone who just had that strength and that power internally to just go for what they wanted. In terms of other role models, that's an interesting question, because one of the things that defines me as a person as well as my musical life is, even though music was my deepest passion and my first language, I didn't talk till I was 3, and yet as a toddler I was going to pianos and figuring out melodies. The very fact that I've had 2 different incarnations as a professional musician with years of raising a child as a single mom in between is sort of something I've come to realize is very typical of women in music. And so if I look at women who've balanced in some way a deep passion with also wanting to be a good mom, it isn't just one role model, but I've certainly seen that there are many other women that try to work with that. So rather than just having one person, it's that sort of a boat that I found myself in, and I see other women in. So it's more like a sense of sisterhood than just a role model. But it's very important as I've looked at the way I've needed to build my own life.
Yeah. Do you have any hidden talents or surprising hobbies that nobody would expect?
I've rehabbed feral kitty cats, and I absolutely love cats and dogs. And there's a shelter called Buddy Dog Humane Society in Sudbury, Massachusetts, or it's on the Wayland-Sudbury border. So I actually go there every 4 to 6 weeks and visit the dogs and cats and just try to give them lots of love as they're waiting for their forever homes, and sometimes actually help people make the decision to adopt. And I founded this Artist Alliance group. I co-founded it, called the Women in Music Gathering. And on April 6th, we actually did a benefit concert to raise money for Buddy Dog. And I wrote a song called Forever Home Lullaby from the point of view of a shelter animal. So I guess one could say a part of me that's very important that if you don't know me, you might not know, is how much I love cats and dogs and feel how important it is to really take care of the ones that are in shelters and help them get forever homes.
Sure. All right, Linda, tell us a little bit more about where we can find your information, website, contact information, whatever you want to share with the fans.
Okay. My website is www.lindamarksmusic.com. So that's really easy, lindamarksmusic.com. I'm on Reverb Nation. I'm on Facebook. I'm on Instagram. I'm on Twitter. I'm even on LinkedIn. So you can find me in any of those places. My email is L as in Linda, S as in Susan, M as in Marks, LSM, and then heart, the body organ, HEART. So LSMHEART at AOL.com. And that's a wonderful way to reach me as well.
Wonderful. Now, we're going to listen to a second song that you have. Tell us a little bit about the song.
This is a song that I did at the Buddy Dog benefit, although it's not the one I wrote for it. I have a Maine Coon cat who I'm actually looking across the room at right now because she's curled up by a chair. And she sleeps on my heart. You know, she's really a soulmate. And I came to realize in a day and age where people are always looking for their human soulmates, that soulmates come in four-legged form. So I wrote a song for Scarlett called Keeper of My Soul, because she really is the keeper of my soul. And it's on my In Grace album. So a song dedicated to my cat. And a really cool thing is that when I performed that song at a Women in Music Gathering show last year, all of a sudden after I did that song, a woman performed a song she did for her dog, and then another person did a song for her cat. And I discovered how many singer-songwriters actually do write songs for their cats and their dogs and their pets. So in that sense, this song, Keeper of My Soul, started the whole impetus that led to the Buddy Dog benefit I talked about a minute ago.
Wonderful. Okay. All right, Linda, I want to thank you for being on the show tonight. We're going to listen to your second song right now, okay?
Thank you so much.
All right. Have a wonderful night.
You too.
Okay. Bye.
As I sleep through the night, you are with me, all is right. Scarlet angel, keeper of my soul. Snuggled close, soft as lace, I am wrapped in your embrace. Scarlet angel, keeper of my soul. Grace, with your paw across my face. Scarlet angel, keeper of my soul. When you purr on my chest, I am safe and I can rest. Scarlet angel, keeper of my soul. Me, Scarlet angel, keeper of my soul. When I prayed, you appeared. What a gift through all these years. Scarlet angel, keeper of my soul. Oh,
want to thank Linda for being on the show tonight. Very inspirational to hear her singing. And like I said, I can definitely hear the classical influence. For anyone that might be looking for vocal lessons, I would definitely recommend you hit her up. I want to thank you again for listening to the show. And to any listeners who may be artists, if you wish to be on the Songwriter Show, please shoot us an email and check out our website. Thank you for listening. I hope your own unique story gets heard around the world. My name is Sarantos. Please join me every single Tuesday night here to hear other amazing artists share their fascinating behind-the-scenes stories right here at the Songwriter Show. And I'm going to leave you tonight in the last few minutes here with a song from the Sleep CD that I put out, which incidentally is my most streamed CD on Pandora, iTunes, and Spotify. So it's got 11 original instrumentals, but here's one of them called Inhaling. Hopefully it puts you in a nice deep sleep tonight. Have a wonderful night, and I'll see you next Tuesday.
Thank you for listening to The Songwriter Show. To keep the momentum going, head over to www.songwritershow.com and join our free music community of artists, songwriters, and producers. That's www.songwritershow.com.